So he's had to undergo a surgical procedure. So he's admitted to R&R hospital. So our thoughts and prayers are with him. But I will be chairing the session in his place. And so at the very outset, I think our speaker, well, definitely it needs a little introduction to our USI members. General Sandhu is a former gunner, and he has had a very distinguished military career. But more importantly, as far as we are concerned, he's an excellent military historian. And this is his second project that he's doing with the center. And the project has been given to him on the strength of his earlier work, which quite frankly, I think ranks amongst the best of our research studies that we have done in the last 20 years. The earlier study that he did was on the Battle of Cham, and that has been received, it has received some outstanding reviews from wide quarters, I mean, a wide variety of people. So we are very, very pleased and grateful to him for having undertaken this second project, which is this time it focuses, it's a military biography. And the military biographies, as you may be aware, there are, of course, a large number of biographies of foreign officers. They range in the hundreds, but when you talk of Indian officers, they're relatively few. Most of them are autobiographies, and they are very often, well, I mean, autobiographies have their own limitations. The subject of this particular biography is the late Lieutenant General Jaswant Singh, and there are two aspects that I would wish to highlight before handing over to General Sandhu. One is that General Jaswant Singh was, of course, perhaps one of the few, if I won't say he's the only, but he was definitely one among the few officers to have seen active service in at each level of his career, in each appointment. So, you know, starting from platoon commander right up to as a divisional commander. And of course, General Sandhu will cover those aspects in a short while. The other thing that I would once again like to say is that the study is what we hope to do also in part through this is to provide scholars with not just a biography of an individual, but also a backdrop or a context of his times, and times not just in terms of military terms, but also in political, social, and most importantly, the ethos, ethics of an officer of the Indian Army, because we all are aware that the Indian Army, as indeed the Indian Armed Forces, they're unique institutions, and our officer cadre has been outstanding, if I may say so myself, over a period of time. And this is a legacy that has been passed down from father to son, from generation to generation, and it continues to motivate and inspire our current colleagues, and of course, we hope that it will do so in future as well. Just a quick word about the project itself. The project isn't complete, but it's part of our format at the center, that in the course of undertaking research on any particular subject, once the author or the scholar has completed a certain, or has completed a certain degree, a certain amount of his research, he is then required to make a presentation to a broader audience in order to invite comments and feedback and incorporate any of those suggestions or that may be forthcoming. So without any further ado, I would now hand you over to Major General AJS Sandhu, and I'm sure will receive a very interesting and illuminating talk on the subject of his research. So over to you.
Thank you, Rana. Firstly, am I audible? Am I okay? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Right. So, firstly, thanks a lot. And before I go to my slides and start the presentation, I'd just like to make one little point, and that is that, as Rana said, it's a work in progress still. But I have been constrained by many factors in this particular research, unlike the previous one. And some of them were beyond our control. Like one is the first and foremost is COVID, which prevented my travel to various formations and units to get information as to where our Gen Jaswant Singh had served. And then the second is the unwillingness of formations and units when you contact them to part with any documentation, what little they have. And then the third one is photographs, because we don't keep photographs of that period. And but in spite of that, I tried to do whatever I could, and still there is some more time. So I am confident that I'll manage to get all that I want. Now, let me just put on a slide for a minute. Three cheers. I managed it, I think. Oh. This time. Okay. So this is the topic of my talk today, and I've titled it Frontline Commander for this reason. And the reason was partly given out by Squadron China, but to put it a little more, you'll find this is generally what I'll be covering. A little bit about the family background, basically his father. And then if you see on the right side, there are highlighted things: platoon, company commander, battalion commander, brigade commander, div commander, all in active combat, all of them, which is a rarity in itself. So, and that, as Squadron China just mentioned, is, of course, he had a I can't say a sterling career, that's up to the reader to decide, but certainly a varied and interesting career. Apart from his hard work, as Cornelius Leader Sinach said, it was also because of the institutional training and the, exposure that he got at each level, starting from the lowest level upwards, that kept preparing him for the next rank and so on. And that resulted in the final career that he led. Now, family background, I'll just cover one thing, and that's about his father. He was born on 10th March 1925 to Sohan Singh and Veer Kaur. A word about Sohan Singh. He was born in Sialkot. That time his father was serving. But the village was in a place called Rampur, and the nearest township was Vadala Sandua. District was, the tehsil was Daska, and the district was Sialkot. Now, this person had never been beyond Sialkot, but he wanted to enlist in the army. Those days, there was no officer rank. So he appeared for a recruiting test, got selected. And the next thing he knew, after his recruitment in 1905, this was 1905, he was put in a train in Lahore and sent off to Calcutta, a man who had never traveled beyond Sialkot. And the next thing he knew, at Calcutta, he was put on other transport and sent off to Burma. He joined 90th Punjabis, which was a battalion raised in 1799 as Madras Native Infantry. And the first 6 years he served in Burma with that unit, with a stint in, the unit also did a stint in Andaman Islands. And then they moved to Nasirabad. Barely had they settled down there when the Great War broke out. They were sent to, Bombay, put on troop ships, sailed to Basra, and the next 4 years was fighting World War I in Mesopotamia. At Mesopotamia, the battalion was involved in a lot of actions, and he took part in many of them. And obviously, he distinguished himself in one action for sure, if not more, because he was mentioned in dispatches. And this is the card. This is the way it was given, which is with us right now. And look at what it says. War of 1914-18, 90th Punjabis, Naik Jaswant Singh was mentioned in a dispatch by Lieutenant General so-and-so for gallant and distinguished services in the field. I have it in command from the King to record His Majesty's high appreciation of the services rendered. And this is one of the lowest gallantry awards. And who signed it? Winston Churchill, who was then the Secretary of War. So after having done, after the war finished and the battalion was to move back, it was moved of all the places to the northwest frontier. And it took part in the Third Anglo-Afghan War, and then was involved in skirmishes with the tribals in Waziristan. And there he got what was called the Force Commander Certificate, on which we have modeled our Army Commander's Commendation. He retired in 1933, and he was given a war jagir, which was a monthly stipend for these 2 awards that he had got, and some land. Now, he wanted his sons to join the army but become officers. So he decided that after the primary classes, he sent his son to appear in a test for King George's Royal Military School. And this is what followed. This is the early service of Jaswant Singh. He joined King George's Royal Military School in Jalandhar. And there he did very well. In fact, he stood first in class 10, and he was given this prize, Chambers 20th Century Dictionary, which is with me today. And it says, this prize was awarded to Jaswant Singh of so-and-so unit, that's his father's unit, for educational efficiency, first place in Form 10th, 1940-41. So after this, he was sent to Kitchener College, which was a springboard of further commission if he were found fit to go to IMA. He appeared, that was a 1 year, you can say, further education for 1 year in Kitchener College, which was in Nagaon, which has since been shut down for a long time now. Now, here he appeared for an interview, got selected, and went for commission to IMA. At that time, there were other places also where commissions were being granted, such as Officer Training School at Belgaum, Bangalore, Indore, and so on. But he went to IMA. And this was a war. The Second World War was on, so these courses were very short, 6 months. And on 1st January 1944, he was commissioned into 7/15 Punjab Regiment. And as was the norm then, 2 months, they were sent to the centers. His center, 15 Punjab, was in Ambala, and thereafter he joined 715 Punjab. Now, 715 Punjab at that point of time had come back from Burma after a stint in Burma, and was part of 39 Training Division in the area of, Saharanpur jungles, the jungles around there. It was a training battalion. Their job was to train officers, JCOs and men, and send them to the battalions which were in Burma in active combat. His seniority itself, one of the officers, another second lieutenant, was the famous, who later became famous, Second Lieutenant Karamjit Singh Judge. He was also in 715 Punjab. Their tents were alongside. They became friends. And then after a few months, when they were fit for combat, they were sent off to Burma. Karamjit Singh Judge went to 4/15 Punjab, and Jaswant Singh went to 6/15 Punjab, both in Burma. Karamjit Singh Judge went on to win the Victoria Cross in March 1945. He died, and it was a posthumous award. Now, Jaswant Singh landed up in 615 Punjab, which was involved, a part of 17 Div, and one of the places where this battalion fought was in the famous Battle of Mactella. And I'll just mention 3 small quick points of his service there. One was that as a young platoon commander, he was given a patrol which was sent across enemy lines, and he went there and did the job of an OP officer, RT officer, and brought down, artillery fire on Japanese troops in the depth and managed to successfully exfiltrate and come back to own lines. The second, and very interestingly, was an attack by Bravo Company. It was, those days there were 6 Punjabi Muslimans in this particular battalion, 2 companies each. So his company was a Punjabi Muslim company, Bravo Company, led by the company commander was Major O'Neill. Now, this was given a task of attacking a strongly held Japanese position northeast of Mektela. So they were launched. He was number 2 officer in that. They launched the attack, and it actually, before the main position, there were a series of intermediary objectives. The attack was launched, and within minutes, the company commander got injured, Major O'Neill. But he carried on for some time with the attack. But later, because the injury became worse, he had to be pulled back for medical aid. So he went off, but the attack carried on, and now the company commander was Jaswant Singh. So he captured the initial intermediary positions. By the time Major O'Neill came back for the final attack, and they captured that position, and I think along with tanks, and there's a bigger story there, and 200 odd Japanese were killed in that action. Both were recommended for awards. Jaswant Singh missed out, and O'Neill got Distinguished Service Order, richly deserved. After that, he became, the war ended, and he became the adjutant. And in his ACR, the CO adjudged him the best Indian officer of the battalion. Interestingly, one of his colleagues, 6 months senior to him, was then Captain Dalbir Singh. They became lifelong friends. And both were divisional commanders later, many years later in the 71 war. Jaswant Singh commanded, Major General Jaswant, that time Major General commanded 10 Dev and Cham, and Major General Dalbir Singh commanded 9 Infantry Division in the Jessore sector in Bangladesh. Now, after that, in December, he got posted to the Services Selection Board. By the time he had got his regular commission. He was one of the first to get it, and therefore his IC number was 604. He was posted to Selection Board in Bareilly. But after a few months, this selection board moved to Yole and became a special selection board for screening officers for regular commission. There was a demobilization, large scale, and officers were being weeded out. And this board was sent there and to screen these officers. Interestingly, in school, one of his teachers was Captain Somdat. Captain Somdat was Cambridge educated, joined the infantry, but switched to Education Corps, and later became the headmaster of Lawrence School, Sanaa, where I studied. And he was my headmaster for a long time. And interestingly, he was one of the officers who came for screening, and there was a role reversal of sorts because his past student had now to sort of judge him for retention. Of course, on his own merit, he got it. This was just a side story I thought I would share. But what happened is that while the selection board was on, independence was declared. And the selection board got wound up on 26th August 47, and they were told to go back to Bareilly. He asked for some leave and decided to go to what was now Pakistan to evacuate his family because partition had taken place. Now, what happened in partition is an interesting thing. Oh yeah, I forgot. This is a photograph after the war of 615 Punjab Regiment. He's the Sikh officer sitting in front. Center is the CO, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon, and next to the Gordon is Major O'Neill, the person who was Bravo Company Commander, but by then was 2IC. And guess what? The CO's dog is right in front of the CO. This is strange. Try that today. You can't do it. There is CO's commanding officer's dog in a formal thing. Anyway, coming to partition. So he, along with his wife and 1-year-old son, was on his way to Pakistan. He reached Lahore, met his in-laws, and then went straight to Rampur, to his village, to evacuate his family. When he reached there, there was a lot of large-scale disturbances that set in, actually in both sides of the border. And there was loot, pillage, killings, rape, and whatnot. We have all read about partition. But nothing had happened in Rampur somehow Two reasons. Firstly, the people were probably peace-loving, the community there. And secondly, Soham Singh, who had war veteran of First World War, he had formed a motley group to secure this place. And there lands up Captain Jaswant Singh, and he had a carbine, some kind of a rifle, which spread to the neighboring villages, and they said, here come, in Punjabi they say, ek kaptan aaya hai, ode kol ganj machine hai. Matlab, he's got a machine gun, and wo sanu bacharega. And the result was that neighboring villages, some families started coming to Rampur. And the doors were thrown open, and each family started accommodating people. Now, he went to Sialkot, which was the regimental center of 15 Punjab Regiment. And he met the commandant there, a British officer. And he told him that he wanted to set up a camp for these refugee camp and for evacuation of these people. And could he help? The CO told him, the colonel of the regiment, he said, listen, we are deployed all over for law and order. We can't help. But I'll give you 2 trucks. You evacuate your family. It's good. But by then he realized he can't. So he said, I can't do that. There are too many people. So you help me in some way. Give me some people, some transport, some tents and so on. But to cut the story short, he said, I can't do that, but I'll give you 1 jeep, 1 ton and 3 soldiers, apart from the 2 drivers. And these were 5 soldiers he gave, all 5 Muslims. And he established a camp there. It was a fluid camp, floating camp, populations coming and going. Because what he would do is that he would send batches to the nearest railway station, protected, put them in the special trains which were running for refugees, and send them towards either Lahore or to Jassar. Now, this chapter is quite detailed and very interesting and gives you the backdrop of what happens there, but I'll narrate just one incident before carrying on. And that is, this was narrated to me by a person from Rampur village, a distant relative, who is now settled in Canada. He said that in the end of September, Jaswant Singh decided to now evacuate the families of Rampur. Others had gone past earlier. So he told them, tomorrow morning, he said you will go in such and such band with under such and such protection, go to Sambrial railway station, and you wait there till I come. There's a special train in the morning. When he reached there at 10 o'clock, he found that the train had come and half of this gang had already boarded. The train was full, and half of this lot which he was sending was also in the train. He told them to get out. And there was a lot of resentment because they had found seats. Otherwise, trains where people were on the roofs here and there. So he told them to get out. There was resentment. But he said, I want to send you as a batch, not in bits and pieces. So you will go by the next train. This train took off. The next train was to come after some time. So they had to wait. He put them in the train and the train went off. Now this man was on that train. He says when the train reached Jassar railway station, what they saw was that the previous train had been attacked and there were corpses of people. They had been attacked by a mob and there were dead people lying all around. This was a train in which some of them would have come. And they realized that whatever it is, they thought that this guy has saved us. The same fellows who had resentment now were singing ballads that he saved us. Had we been on the train, we would be one of the dead bodies. Anyway, partition was over. He wound up the camp. He wound up the camp, went to Sialkot, and then when another special train was organized for the Hindus and Sikh soldiers which were coming back from there, he came in one of them and joined back to the selection board. Now, after that, what happened is that this is one of the photos at that time when he had gone to Sialkot cantonment. It was an oasis of peace and tranquility, unlike what was happening around, like all cantonments are. And look at them, they're all armed, youngsters, young captains and lieutenants. And then 10 years later, his thing was recognized and he was given a commendation card. His name is the first on top, right here. Now, junior leadership. These are the ranks and appointments that he held in this short while. I mean, you can see that it is rare. You see G3MO, G2MO, BM161, BM81. Staff College Wellington, John Chancellor Latimer. 2 MOs, 2 BMs, 2 prestigious courses, which is another rarity in itself. But this is what his profile was. And these are some of the things which prepared them for the future. Now, I just want 2 incidents. One is when he was in G. enlisted as G3 in Demo Directorate in January 49. The DMO was Brigadier Sam Manekshaw, then Brigadier Sam Manekshaw. And they had people like Colonel Satarawala, Major Raina, Sinha, and all this lot. They all became generals later. 2 of them became chiefs, for that matter. Now, what happened is that in 49 itself, he set his moment he joined. Within months, he decided that he wanted to do staff college course, and the next year's course, not that year's course, but the next year's course. Now, the first 3 courses had been by nomination, and the 4th post-war course, by the time staff college had moved to Quetta to Wellington, the 4th course, which he was setting his eyes on, was going to be with based on an examination, a written examination. This was the first examination, so there were no old papers to go by. But he said, I will sit on it. When his application went to Sam, he was shocked. He summoned him and he said, what nonsense is this? You're too junior. Don't apply right now. He says, if you apply, let's say you don't apply, you finish your tenure here, you'll go back to a unit, and you know what you will be? You'll be an MTO. That was a lowly appointment, mechanical transport officer. And he says, if you do get through, which is, I don't know whether you'll get through in the exam, but if you do get through and do the staff college, you'll be so junior still that you will again go back to the unit as MTO and not as a brigade major. So you wait. But he appeared. He insisted. So Sam signed the application, he appeared, and he got a competitive vacancy. But another incident took place. Sam was correcting tactics papers as a brigadier. He had been given the tactics paper to correct. Then he was correcting it when one of the officers, who was from his old battalion in Burma, 24th Regiment, he came for some work and he told him, just let me finish this paper, you sit down. And when he sat down, in between, he just mentioned, he says, you know, this paper that I'm correcting, this question, people have written 3 pages, and this one which I'm correcting, his fellow has answered it in 3/4 of a page, and this is the best answer. That guy was looking and he told him, he says, sir, don't you recognize the handwriting? This is of your own G3. That's another interesting incident which took place. And of course, he got through, went there. And then all this happened. Now, when he came back from Latimer, UK, he was posted, as I said, to MO Directorate. But there was no accommodation. So he went to he left his wife in Simla with his younger brother, who was in the army also. And he took a roadways bus from, direct bus from Simla to Delhi to join. Now, when this bus took off from Simla, within minutes, the driver was swerving left and right, and it was quite apparent there was something fishy with this fellow. He was unable to drive. And then he would halt, drink a sip of water, carry on, halt. And somewhere near Kandaghat, he just shoved his vehicle to the left, jumped out and threw up, vomited. I said, I can't drive any further. Now, Major Jaswant Singh had sensed it. He asked him, he says, have you been drinking? He said, yes. This was his hangover. Now, the irate passengers, they didn't know what to do. And he said, I am a major from the Indian Army. I've done a driving and maintenance course. I've driven heavy trucks. And if you agree, I will drive it up to Kalka. There was no choice. They agreed. And this major drove a government roadways bus from Kandaghat up to, Kalka, where a relief driver was organized, and they went onwards. Now, after his tenure in MO Directorate, during that time, he got approved for Lieutenant Colonel. And he was looking for command of a battalion, and instead his posting came as instructor, Staff College. It was the first time an officer was going on promotion without commanding a battalion. Later on, 2 years later, even General Sinha, same thing happened with him, famous General Sinha. Now, so he landed up in Staff College. 2 years passed by. I don't have time to cover all this, and he got posted to 7th Punjab. First year was in training, and next year the war broke out, 65 war. And this was when he was a company commander. He had led a post, his early service. When he was in 7th Punjab as a company commander, he had led a patrol through Sikkim into Tibet. That time Sikkim was not part of India. It was a protectorate. And into Sikkim, into Tibet, and got some this thing. And you can see one Tibetan guide with him. This is one of those patrols. Anyway, so here we come to, now he was now a battalion commander, and he was destined to lead it in action again. Now, without going into this thing, we all know that after Pakistan attacked in Grand Slam, Gibraltar, then Grand Slam towards Akhnur, we went in Punjab first in Lahore sector and then in 2 days later in Sialkot. Now the Lahore sector responsibility, as we all know, was 11 Corps. They had to advance up to Ishugal Canal as the first step. 3 divisions were there, 15, 4 and 7. Now 15 division was on the right side and they were required to capture Ishugal Canal from the start of the canal in the north all the way up to GT Road and the adjoining railway line and capture the 3 bridges which were on it. One was on the railway line, one was on the GT Road itself, and the third one was in the north, somewhere where the canal started. Now, I will not cover what happened in GT Road, etc. That is separate. But on the north, what happened was that meanwhile, 7th Punjab, his battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Jaswant Singh battalion, had been made the Corps Reserve, and then it became Div Reserve, and was being shunted here and there, moving left, right, and center wherever there was a crisis situation or requirement of additional troops. But on 6th of September, early morning, along with when the whole Corps was crossing, 1st Jat was told to attack in the north and capture the bridge, the northern bridge, at a place called Pani. In Punjabi, they say Pani Tilwa. Pani Tilwa. This was a bridge there. And they attacked. They achieved surprise, as indeed everybody did. And they captured that. But they couldn't hold on because those people launched a massive counterattack and they were pushed right back. And by 6 o'clock, they had gone in, 11 o'clock back, they were back to start position. On the same night, another attack was put in, and this time it was by 6 Command, which had covered itself with glory in 62. They attacked on the 6th, 7th night. They also captured the canal. And the Pakistanis launched a counterattack and they were again pushed back. Now, 2 attacks had failed in a way. Next day, Commander 96, under whom this force was, he decided to launch a combined attack. I don't know, I don't have much of details of how it was done, but it was a mixture of 1st Jat and 6th Command. And they launched an attack. They again captured this. And yet again, they were thrown back. Now, with these 2 failures, in fact, if you know, General Dhillon was a famous man for sacking. He sacked a Major General, 2 brigadiers, and God knows how many lieutenant colonels. These 2 lieutenant colonels were also sacked. One of them, he had his rank, when he was a substantive rank, so he couldn't be demoted. But the other CO was made a major. And now the axe was hanging over the brigade commander. So he asked for his 3rd battalion to come, that was 7th Punjab, and he says, let me have another shot. And that's how 7th Punjab, which was this battalion, reserve battalion, was given to him. Now, this is what happened thereafter. This map shows in a way the attacks which were put by 7th Punjab. So, Lieutenant Colonel Jaswant Singh, when he was given that task to capture Ishugal Canal, he had done his recce. He had met the COs of 6th Command and 1st Jat and got a fair idea of what was ahead, the terrain and the enemy. And he realized that instead of going straight to the canal, first capture these 2 villages on which the canal is named, Ichugal Hitar and Ichugal Uttar. There are 2 villages there, if you can see. He decided to clear these positions first and then go for the bridge, which is marked there. But when the plan was being made, there was a disagreement between him and the commander. And there was one youngster who was in a trench next door who in an interview told me, he later commanded the same battalion. He was in a trench near where this discussion was taking place. He said there were heated words exchanged because the commander wanted him to attack in a certain manner and the CO, that's Jaswant Singh, wanted to attack in a different manner. So finally, he heard him say, he heard the CO tell the commander, he said, sir, you please give me the task and let me execute the plan the way I want it to. And the commander, to his credit, agreed. And so the attacks went in. Now, the attack went like this, that the first attack he launched was on Ichugal Hitar. There was a ranger post here, and there was an OP here. His dead body was found later. He attacked with a company, with another company in reserve, supported by troop each of Skinner's horse, 1st horse, and 14 horses, Sindh horse. And they captured this. The timings, etc., given. This bridge, this position was captured, and some dead bodies, including that of one captain who was the artillery observation post officer, captured here. I'll show you a photo of, not him, but roughly there when they reached there. Now, having captured this, without wasting of time, he sent patrols out towards the canal and towards this, the other village. And these patrols came back and said that there was a lot of digging going on the canal here. The Pakistanis probably sensed another attack coming, but he says this Ichugal Uttar was not a very heavy, it was very lightly held. So he gave orders for the second attack. And this attack was launched, and this village was also captured on Thursday. The first one went on 12th, second went on 13th. So both the villages were there. The villages were there. The artillery, Pakistan had some solid artillery. They got a lot of artillery fire. A lot of people, actually, when I give you the casualties, there were a lot of dead and wounded in these attacks from our side. And in fact, once one shell landed exactly in where the CO and his party was, 20 feet away from where he was. When they heard the whoo, that thing, shell's coming, they all died for cover. And the shell landed 20 feet from where he lay down or died for cover. It killed one person of his, one Jawan and injured another. I mean, just the rest got saved. Anyway, so thereafter, he decided to progress his attack. And on 14th morning, he launched a 2-company attack, which is written here below in black, note below. But what happened is they attacked. Charlie Company managed to capture the left side of the bridge. Delta Company only partly captured. They were still at it when the tanks, some Pakistani tanks, came around and tried to outflank these 2 companies. Tried to interpose themselves between these 2 companies and the rest of the battalion, which was still in the rear. So there was a threat of these to be cut off. And so they were ordered to withdraw. The commander actually said, call off the attack and establish a firm base. So they were pulled back and some kind of a firm base was established behind. And while he was awaiting further orders from brigade headquarters, he realized that it is pointless. They were in the face of these Pakistani troops on the canal. So he took permission from the commander. He said that, if we don't capture it now, we may not get an opportunity. The commander gave permission and he launched an attack again. This was on 15th or 16th. And this was a night attack. They succeeded in capturing this. And other companies quickly built up, and this canal was with them. There was a lot of gallantry, etc., shown by individual soldiers, which I will not mention. But by 16th, this canal had been captured, and they found the bridge blown up, and there were a number of counterattacks launched, but they held on. In fact, it's the 1st battalion which captured and held on to the issue with them. The first battalion to actually capture was 3 Jat on the GT road. They went beyond, actually almost to the outskirts of Lahore, but they had to pull back. And then they had to recapture all that on 22nd. But this battalion managed to hold on. And they got the highest number of gallantry awards of that 42 gallantry awards. And they suffered 151 killed or wounded. Now, some photographs. This is the commanding officer with this group in Ichugal Hittar. You can see the squadron commander with him, this photograph. This is the bridge which had been blown up by the Pakistanis. You can see some Pakistani troops in the rear. This is the CO with some of his one officer and one Jawan standing next to a Pakistani tank, which their RCLs had knocked off and their Pakistanis had abandoned it. And this is the Chief of Staff, Western Command, when he came. He's been shown around the Ishukal Canal. You can see the water. So this is where it is. And at the end of this war, ceasefire, General Dhillon presented a war trophy to this battalion. This is the only battalion of infantry amongst infantry, armor, and artillery which was given this trophy. It's a huge trophy lying in the mess now. Anyway, after that, they pulled back, and after the Tashkent agreement, the battalion was pulled back and they went to Yol. And then he received his orders to go on promotion as brigadier. And where does he land up? He lands up to command 61 Mountain Brigade in Mizo Hills, which was at its peak insurgency. It was in a situation like no other. I will not go into, he took over in end of November 66. They had raised an insurrection on 1st of April, night of 28th February, 1st of April. In fact, the Mizo National Front of their army struck all over the state on one night. If you really ask me, that was the surgical strike, the first surgical strike. And that's the only time when the Indian Air Force was called and the artillery was used in our own soil. But that part I'm not covering today, though it will be in the book. Now, this is when he took over. You see him as a brigadier. This is from whom he took over. That is Brigadier Kabraji, his predecessor. And please, I want to mention one thing, that it is, the insurgency is not like what is happening today. Terrorism is different. Here you find terrorists come in and, these are terrorist acts. Whereas there, that was an army in combat dress. They had arms. They were trained by the Pakistanis and Chinese. They had proper battalions, commands. Let me show you that. This is Mizo Hills. It was a hill. It was Mizo Hills district. It became a state much later. And this is it. And they were very underdeveloped. And look at the number of villages which are marked here. That's why they had to move, and there was a big problem there. They had modeled themselves on the Malaysian cells. I won't cover this, but look here. This is the organization of a Mizo battalion, section, platoon, company. Look at that. They used to attack in strength. They had organized themselves in commands. These were their commands when they struck on 1st April. And the code word was right on top, Operation Jericho. But later, as the insurgency carried on, and when Brigadier Jaswant Singh had taken over, they changed their organization a bit, a command and control part, and they made it into two brigades, the Lion Brigade and the Dagger Brigade. 4 battalions and 3 battalions. They were named after their Mizo heroes of the past. Now, coming back here. Now, the command and control structure was slightly different. If you see here, they are wearing the formation sign, if you see, of this. One is clearly visible of Brigadier Kabraji. This is 8 Div, 8 Infantry Division. So 61 Mountain Brigade had been moved from neighboring place, from Silchar, and they were told to move to Mizo Hills with 4 battalions, which built up to, at its peak, was 20 battalions later. But they were not put under command 8 Div. They were placed under command 101 communication zone area in Shillong, and further they were under command of Eastern Command, that is Sam Manekshaw again. So the command and control. Now, when Jaswant Singh landed up there, he found that there was no concept of operations. There was no formal doctrine laid down. Of course, people had ideas of, they were all coming from insurgency areas. They moved from Nagaland only. But the ball game here was slightly different. So he laid down, he evolved a concept on which the operations were to be based. The battle procedures and battle drills down below, they didn't change. But the broad thing was laid down. And there were some military measures and there were some non-military measures. I won't go through them. Time is still ticking. So I will skip all this. But this part I will talk about grouping of villages. Grouping of villages was a very controversial kind of a decision taken. It was to move villages from the hinterland. You saw that map. You saw this map. Let me show it again. Look, and these are, there were triple or quadruple the number of villages which are shown here. And some of the villages had just 20 people, 50 people, 100 people. So it was, you could neither provide security, nor could you prevent Mizo's hostiles going there, the insurgents, nor could you provide economic measures to them. So it was decided, and it was based on the Malaysian pattern. And it was decided that they will group them into centers and bring them along the main road at selected places where there was land, adequate land to compensate for the land that they were losing. And they had to construct huts. They had to construct and then make the basic facilities available, such as water, electric supplies, etc. So they had to set up these villages. But they were, so in a way, it solved to some extent the security issue, because it denied the Mizo hostiles the shelter they were getting, the food they were getting, the money they were getting, the information they were getting from these people. But it meant movement of these villages. So it was a two-way thing. So it was done, 2 phases were done. The first phase was done in January, February of 67, and some more 67, 68, 69. And then the matter was struck down by the Guwahati High Court. Now, there were a large number of incidents. Just to mention, I'll just tell you one incident which took place in February, just to show what kind of things were happening. At night, one night in February, the Mizos, some 200 of them, which means 2 battalions in there, because their battalion was 100 plus, they attacked the camp at night. I won't name the battalion. And there was a huge firefight. In the morning, the battalion had lost, Indian battalion had lost 21 dead and 8 wounded. This was the scale at which the Mizo insurgency was. And there were many more such things. But and equally, we launched many into our hideouts, killed, captured the hostiles along with arms and so on. And then gradually they started surrendering. So soon enough, anyway, let me show you some photographs. Now, this was his first. On the right is Brigadier Jaswant Singh. On the left is Major General Bhandari, who was the first GOC of 101 Comzone, to whom he reported and interned to SAM. And later came Sagat Singh, who's here, the famous Sagat Singh, who became famous in 1971. And here is the brigade commander and Sagat Singh receiving the then Chief Minister, BP Chalihia of Assam. He had come to see some of these top villages. Here, if you see in the rear, you see those huts. That has been established by by the army, and you can just forget about everything else. Just see the manner in which they're standing. So informal. In fact, the brigade commander, Brigadier Jaswant Singh, and the way he's standing is a mirror image of what the chief minister is standing. Both have their arms on their waist and leaning on the left stick. I mean, this was the way they used to deal. Not today you see subservience and 10 times saluting left, right. This is the way it is. This is what it was. This is some of the human, to win over the hearts and minds of people. This, you see this. They're giving some kits to get some supplies, etc. And this major who was bending down became a major general later. He commanded 9 para forces, the special forces. This is again bonding, the commander meeting some villagers. This is protected villages. This is how they were protected. You can see the wooden spikes. All around those protected villages, there were wooden spikes. And here you find this patrol, security patrol. Here is the commander, there's a visiting officer. You can see the man in the P cap. Here is briefing him about how they were providing security and so on. And this is briefing the press. There are a lot of press delegations used to come. And this is one of the delegations which came, and he's there. His brigade major is next to him. He had a wonderful staff. His brigade major, DQ, etc. I mean, his staff and 61 Mountain Brigade was outstanding. They all got VSM, the PM and DQ at least. This is after a briefing of the press, and this is with some of the defense public relations officer had brought these journalists. Now, after this, the tenure was over, and he was selected. His performance was obviously good because right from here he went to NDC, no staff in between. He went 1 year NDC, and thereafter he was posted as BGS to 11 Corps, and the corps commander was none other than the famous General Bhagat, P.S. Bhagat. When Bhagat got posted out, General Raleigh came in, who remained a corps commander during the war, but he got his posting order. Brigadier Jaswant Singh got his posting order to take over 10 Infantry Division, and 10 Infantry Division, it was not deployed the way it is today. The division was not deployed the manner in which you see it today. Today, if you ask the people who are there, it is very close. The division quarters are Akhnur, and the brigades are within easy reach, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and even the one in the hills is not too far away. But that time, his front line was where it is today, and his David quarter was in Pathankot, 100 and some kilometers away. And the 3rd Brigade was in Dalhousie, still behind. And so it was a very unwieldy kind of a command and control. But as the war clouds gathered, they moved to Akhnur, and finally came the war. Now, 71 war, this is the map. Now, the area you see, why is it that they've attacked? So there's a book I've written, as Rana China mentioned. So I won't go into that detail, but just for those who are civilians, etc., who are on this, this is the area, this chump you see here. This is the old ceasefire line, and then in green is the international border, and this is Pakistan. So Pakistan was always apprehensive of an Indian attack onto the GT road. This is a GT road. This is closest to the Indian border anywhere in the country. This is the closest. And here is the area which is in white. This is the hill sector, but this is white. This is plain ground where they could use armor, and Akhnur was very close. And they had attacked in 47, 48, 65. They had attacked, and the second phase of which was led by Yahya Khan, then Major General, and they had reached almost near Akhnur. But then when we attacked in Punjab, they had to pull back, and therefore they couldn't catch us. Now, this is the strategic importance, and if you go further, this is a close-up of that, the top area. This is the area, the funnel, so-called funnel. Ceasefire line, international border, Chenab River, and this is Akhnur. And this was the only ridge line which gave defense potential. The rest was all plain. Now, when he took over, he found an anomaly that the defense was based so far behind. You see this right here. This was where the brigade was. There were just small troops here and a little band here, covering troops, what we call them. And the reserve brigade was here because 52 brigade, although his 3rd brigade, was also the corps reserve. So it was in the rear. He started fighting to move this brigade from here into the salient because he said we must meet them up ahead. And it was a losing battle for 1 year till Sam Manekshaw came on a visit on 1st November, when just a month before the war, and approved this move. And that saved the day. Now, while this was going on, he came out with a plan, offensive plan. And he says, why should we remain the defensive? And let's go for the offensive. And the offensive, in a sense, meant launching an attack from here, like I said, from this place. First capturing the Marala headworks. This you see down below, Marala headworks here. The Marala headworks is where the canal system of Pakistan starts. To capture this, you cut off the canal, the agricultural base of Pakistani Punjab. And after that, they were to advance towards GT Road. And in 71, there were no obstacles. So this plan was agreed to by the Corps Commander, Army Commander, and he was given additional troops. But unfortunately, on 1st December, 50 years ago to the day, today, he was told, put the offensive on hold and adopt defensive positions. Now imagine a division which is poised to go ahead, being told, no, you go back, roll back to defense. And while they were given 3 days to do that, but while they were still doing Pakistani's attack. And they had to start from the war or that battle from an initially unbalanced position. Now, I won't go into that bulk of it, but this was the final deployment. But how did the Pakistanis attack? Look at it. This was a Pakistani attack. They were all over. Because Yahya Khan, who had fought here in 65, now wanted to replicate it in 71. And he had given this divisional commander 2 additional infantry brigades, 1 additional armored brigade. And the artillery, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, was mind-boggling. It was 10.5 artillery regiments, which was unknown fact to most. It was more artillery given to support this attack of Pakistan than Pakistan had in the entire Bangladesh to defend itself. Anyway, the attack, I won't cover this thing, but they crossed over thrice. All 3 times they were pushed back. And this is a Pakistani book, chap who writes Power of Defense, 3 Indian battalions, hold back 3. He is of praise. He praises the brigade which held down against the Pakistani onslaught. Anyway, the situation, they had been pushed back thrice, and finally the situation is stabilized, and they were to go into a counterattack when the ceasefire intervened. Now, that part I won't cover because that is too much to be covered in this. But suffice to say that they were halted this time on the Manavartavi, and the second thing is the GOC died there. The number of casualties that this division suffered here, when you compare percentages, 45% of what they suffered in the entire Western Front was right here. And if you compare it with the Eastern Theatre, Bangladesh, 55% of Pakistani dead were here and wounded were here. That is the scale of the attrition that they suffered from the 10 Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Jaswant Singh. Now these are some of the photographs. I'll just skip them. This is peacetime mode. This is after the war came out. This is illustrated weekly clipping. Major General Jaswant Singh, the savior of Cham, etc. And this is very interesting. This is a letter written by General Dhillon, the same man who was commanding the corps in 11 Corps in 65. He had been his corps commander, and this is what he wrote to him during the war. 15th December, he writes from Delhi. He says, this letter was received, of course, after the war. My dear Jaswant, my heartiest congratulations for a magnificent battle, the finest staged by the Indian Army to date. When asked or something, I told everybody that there is not the slightest cause for worry as you are there. And then is a telling sentence. He says, I had not graded you outstanding, dash, the only one I have in my 36 years of service, dash, without knowing. Well done. And then he goes on to end it. Okay, this is interesting. After the war, Sunil Dutt, he had a troop called the Jantar troop, and he was sent to entertain the troops still deployed in war zone. And the program made for him was to go to the Eastern Theatre first. There was victory there, but he said, no, I want to go to Cham first, because he also had followed the battle. And he landed up here. And here he is introducing his wife, the GOC, after the war. And there are a large number of photographs. But then came an onslaught of dignitaries and visitors. Here is Karan Singh. Here is the Home Minister, K.C. Pant, viewing the Manavar Tavi now from home side to the other side, the GOC showing it to him. Here is Air Chief Marshal Lal. There's a group photograph with Air Chief Marshal Lal. And this is another interesting thing. You know, many years later, 20 years after that, the person who was commanding the division was this gentleman with the 9 paras, Major General, later Lieutenant General Tej Pathak. He decided to make a memorial, more of a based on nature, natural kind of no obelisk and brass things and all. And he found a spot which overlooked the battlefield, and he called it the Grove of Silence. And he asked the GOC's wife, then GOC's wife, Gen Jaswant Singh's wife, to come and inaugurate it. She's standing here next to him. And this was inaugurated. After that, she met some of the Veer Naris. You can see they broke down, some of them. Their husband, they had lost their husbands in war, and they were locals from that area. And you can see this interaction. So this was something different. Now, just in passing, before I go to the last part, I'll just take another 5 minutes. Brothers in Arms is a chapter which is appearing in my book, which I'm not covering here, but I've listed the 4 brothers. Major General Jaswant Singh, GOC 10 Dev, Sham, Brigadier H.S. Sandhu, Commander 350 Brigade, part of 9 Dev in the Jessore Khonna sector. Next, Lieutenant Colonel Upkar Singh Sandhu, CO 7 Punjab Mech, 1st Battalion to enter Jessore Airfield. Flight Lieutenant Mahinder Singh Sandhu, 106 Strategic Recce Squadron, who led some bomber missions, find the regular cannibals rather than this. He was decorated with the Veer Chakra. Now, these are 4 real brothers, and they were in active combat. So Div Commander, Brigade Commander, Battalion Commander, not in staff here and there. There's must be some kind of a record. And I put an asterisk here because Upkar Singh Sandhu commanded 7th Punjab in 1971 war. And when his brother, which I have already covered, had commanded the same battalion in the 65 war. It's a rare 2 brothers commanding the same battalion. Possible. Happens, in fact, father, son, brother. But 2 brothers commanding the same battalion in war, that is a rarity in itself. And in fact, not only were these 4 there, the top 2, their sons were also there. So as a family, there were 6 people in the war. Now, this is the last part. Higher command and staff assignments. From there, he went to GOC 101 Com Zone area, Shillong, in February. But within 4 months, he was posted as Chief of Staff. 1 corps. Now, 1 corps was still in Shakargarh sector. And they had to, sorry, I think my videos. So, and they were, after the Simla agreement, they had to disengage, and much of, there was a lot of meeting between opposite commanders, and General K.K. Singh used to send the Chief of Staff from his side to coordinate this. Finally, the disengagement took place, but one captain recalled to me that when after the thing, when they knew after the similar agreement that they were going to pull back, he says the chief of staff called me and gave me a group of people. And he says, you go around for the next 7 days or 10 days, he gave him some time, along with some engineers and surveyors, etc. He says, you please do a map, terrain mapping of this entire area that is under us, starting from one end to the other. And a terrain map was prepared at the behest of the chief of staff. I don't know if it's still there, firstly, in the corps headquarters. But secondly, in any case, the terrain must have changed by now. After that, he got posted as director staff duties, and which is ADGSD now, Staff Duties Directorate. And thereafter, he became Deputy Chief of Army Staff. Incidentally, these two terms are, these two designations came up after 1962. Earlier, Deputy Chief used to be called Chief of General Staff, and DSD used to be called the Deputy Chief of General Staff. After that, they became Deputy Chief and DSD. And at that time, I would like to tell you that today there are 4 Deputy Chiefs of Staff dealing with different segments of training, procurement, that. That time, there was only one Deputy Chief, single Deputy Chief. And other than military intelligence and military operations, MI and MO, which was dealt by the Vice Chief, everything else was under one man. So, and he was made Deputy Chief by General Raina, who took over. They took over, I mean, Raina took over 1 month later, but it was he who approved his appointment there. And he remained right through 3 years under Raina. So he implemented, in effect, all the policies of General Raina as Deputy Chief. And it was during this time that he became Colonel of Punjab Regiment. And it was in this time that all the Punjab, Raina had decided that we should move the centers to the interior and move the field formations front line. And therefore, as Colonel of the regiment, he was responsible in many ways of setting up of the current Punjab Regimental Center in Ramgarh, which has come up very well now. I'll just show you a photo or two. After that, he moved and took over one corps, just one corps, which had fought in the Sialkot sector in 65 and Shakargarh in 71. He had been Chief of Staff, so he actually knew everything there. And he had been Chief of Staff under K.K. Singh. And now, so this tenure of 2 years here, he was basically, he ensured, had 2 corps level exercises to see that everything was, the corps was ready at any time for its operational role. But I'll narrate one incident before passing off to the last day, that is as Vice Chief. And that is nothing to do with operations. What happened is that in August of 1978, there had been unseasonable monsoons, very heavy rains, and they carried on into September. Now, when, as you see, his Flagstaff house was not too far from a golf course, and golf course was on the banks of the Yamuna River. Whenever he had time, like all senior officers, he would go and have a game of golf. He has foursomes, or obviously those brigadiers over there. Now, one day, he found that the Yamuna River, which passed right next to the golf course, the water level was unusually high. He observed it. After 1 or 2 days, when he came next, it was higher still. So one of his people who was with him in his foursome was the chief engineer. He told him, he said, listen, there's something, this water level is rising, and if it continues, there could be flooding. He said, those chaps said, no, sir, it's often, they had been there longer than him. He had just taken over that very year. So they said, sir, no, this is a normal fixed feature. There's nothing to happen. But he got worried. He says, okay, you do one thing. You please contact the flood, river, whatever, the irrigation department, etc., and see the state of the water reservoirs upriver. That's at Okhla, Tajewala, and so on. What is that state of those reservoirs, and what is the outflow they are planning? And give me a report tomorrow. Next day, when that man came, he said, sir, the water rivers are overflowing, and they are going to let out a gush of water if the monsoons don't stop, if the rains don't stop. Not rains but the rains upstream. So he told the Chief of Staff to immediately do 2 things. Immediately inform the civil administration that there's likelihood of flooding. So do take whatever measures you want to. Chief of Staff was the famous later Lieutenant General, then Major General Ranjit Singh Dayal. And he says, evacuate all the low-lying areas. There was much resistance. He says, please abandon your barracks, pick up everything, your vehicles, your stuff, and move. And since his house, Flagstaff house was right there, they moved everything. Normally, when you go on posting, you take your own belongings, but here you have to move the MES furniture, etc. It was just a bare house, Flagstaff house, which was left there. And sure enough, on 7th, 8th of September, the Yamuna River breached the embankment and the lower part of Mathura got flooded. And he had meanwhile moved to officers' mess. And even today, if any of you ever go to Mathura and have a chance to go to the Corps Commander's house, there is a black line on the portico, and that is the high water mark. This is where they had reached water level on that. So anyway, now after that he got posted. Actually, his posting came as just 2 minutes more. His posting came as Army Commander, Northern Command. He was to relieve General Gurbachan Singh, Puch. But what happened? The Vice Chief suddenly took premature retirement. And then General Malhotra, who was the chief, rang him up after his posting had been issued and said, I'm planning to change your posting and get you here as Vice Chief. And the reason he said was that when you were Deputy Chief, when General Jaswant was Deputy Chief, he said, I was Vice Chief, and Malhotra was Vice Chief. So he says, some of the things which we have started then are known to you and me. So I want you to come here. And, they are reaching fruition, fructification. And you are the best man to do that. And after that, you got enough service. He was still 2 months short of 55. He says, then we will send you the Army Commander. So he landed up as Vice Chief. On 1st February, he took over. On 10th March was his birthday. His staff captain brought a cake to the office, baked by his mother, who was the widow of a Punjab regimental officer. They cut the cake, wished him a happy birthday, and long life, etc., not knowing that his life was another 20 days only. So that takes me to the last day. I will not cover what all happened for those 2 months that he was there. 30th March, 1980, which was to be his last day. It was a Sunday. On Sundays, he usually spent time on private, catching up with personal work and family matters, etc. But that day was going to be very interestingly busy, at least the first part of it. He had 2 engagements, one official, one private, one personal. The official one was that, in those days, the protocol was when a foreign dignitary came on a state visit and was to be seen off. He was seen off at what was then known as Parliament Airport by the Prime Minister, Cabinet Minister, and 3 Serving Chiefs. So that time, Yasser Arafat had been the PLO leader. He was on a state visit. We had recognized him as Palestine as a state in those days. And he was going back. So he was to be seen off, and General O.P. Malhotra, who was the chief, was on a foreign visit. So Lieutenant General Jaswant Singh, Vice Chief of Army Staff, was officiating as the Chief of the Army Staff. So he had to go there. So the morning, the car came, Captain Shuri, staff officer, picked him up, and he was driven. He drove to Parliament Airport, reached in time, lined up like everybody else. Then came Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She met everybody lined up, cabinet minister, hello, hello, hello. And then she waited. Yasser Arafat came, met everybody, seen off, the plane took off, and he returned back home. Changed into civils, had his mid-morning tea, attended to a few files, and then was his next engagement. The next engagement was with 2 of his buddies, Mr. Kampani and Mr. Harmandir Singh. Both were ex-army officers with whom he had served earlier in life as a junior officer. Both had quit the army. Both were in IAFS. Both were additional secretaries at that time. One went on to become, both became secretaries later. One went on to become even the Lieutenant Commander of Andaman, and the other one joined the UNO for a while. Now, one of them knew the manager of Regal Cinemas, and 2 days before, a picture had been released, The Burning Train. Dharminder, Jitinder, Vinod Khanna, Hema Malini, Neetu Singh, and God knows who. It was a blockbuster, and he had organized that we will see the movie and have lunch and some beer, etc. together. So he landed up at Regal. They had organized a box. Today's generation, I don't think they even know what is a box. but there was a box where you could sit privately and view and serve refreshments, etc. So they saw the movie, had lunch, he came back. And then, as on such holidays, he would have a half an hour, 40 minutes cat nap. So he changed his clothes, had a nap, got up, went to his study. And by the way, the house was 3 Racecourse Road. Vice Chief's designated house in those days was 3 Racecourse Road, which is the Prime Minister's complex today. And then he went to his study, had tea. While he was, oddly saw him last, who had gone past him, the bathroom or something, to put some clothes there. And he was coming back and he said, the Sahab khade hue the with the file in his hand, and suddenly he heard a thud and he fell. He saw him fall. He had a massive cardiac arrest and he was gone. The commandant of AFMC, not AFMC, Armed Forces Clinic, he was a cardiac surgeon also. He came immediately. He tried to resuscitate him, but it was too late. And he said, he later mentioned that even if this kind of cardiac arrest he had, even in the ICU without, he would not have survived it. Next day, befittingly, or that night in Doordarshan, they announced his death and they showed him alive. Alive was the morning thing at Palam Airport. Alongside that was his news office passing on. And next morning, befittingly, the first letter of condolence, which was delivered by hand, was from another neighbor across the road. That was Mrs. Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She had got to know and she signed this letter and sent it to him. The funeral was held in the evening, and amongst those who attended was General Karyappa, who happened to be there. And that brought to an end his career. He was only 55. And but he had a very nice, interesting career, served with honor and dignity for the time that these 37 years that he was in the Indian Army. And I end now by just showing you a few photographs of covering this segment of his. This is when he was Chief of Staff. This is General Bhagat visiting one corps. You can see KK Singh standing next to him and some other officers. This is, again, when he was Chief of Staff. Right in the center is General KK Singh, Corps Commander. Next to him with a number of badges, front row Div Commanders and the Chief of Staff. The man with all those badges is then Major General Wag Pinto, who passed away recently. He also became an Army Commander. This is when he was Chief of Staff. This is when he was Colonel of Punjab Regiment. He's inspecting that's the center commandant on the left side, showing him some model of some thing which was to come up in the new center. Like I said, he oversaw the whole move, and here he's seeing that. This, as Colonel of the regiment, he's presenting a banner to one of the units, a championship banner. And thereafter, this is after he passed away, lying in state. This is the RRM, Rajya Raksha Mantri, paying his respects. And then amongst the diplomatic corps, I've just chosen one photo. This is the Chinese military attaches and the civilian, whatever, consular or somewhere. And this is Gen Jaswant Singh, who was the Home Minister. He was also staying in the neighborhood. This is one of the photographs of the funeral procession. You see the truck with the gun carriage behind. This is another view of the whole thing. You see how long the 3 drummers in front. And the rest of it is, of course, I just selected a few photographs. So this brings me to the end of this talk. I think I've exceeded by a few minutes, but it was a huge thing to cover, and therefore I left many gaps. This brings me to the end of my part of it. Thank you, Rana. I'll just take off the slides if I can manage to do so. Let me see. Yeah. Thank you, and sorry for overshooting.
Not at all, sir. Thank you for a very interesting talk on a wonderful subject. And before I make some comments, may I, if there is anybody who has any questions or would like to make any comments, you can, I think, unmute yourself and please do so. Or if you wish, you can type it out into the box on the bottom on the right, and we can take them on.
Abdo, it'll be very interesting for you to know that I met your father when he was the Chief of Staff and one quad was located in Samba. I happened to be there as we were withdrawing from the Pak occupied area, and for some reason or the other, I was called to the Corps headquarters. I can't remember what. Certainly, as a young captain, I must have been to boot me around somewhere, but I do recall meeting our dad there. So, and of course, Abdu and self are batchmates. We know each other very well. We discuss a lot of military subjects. So, great talk. So I thought I'd just let you know this little tidbit.
Thank you.
I think I met your dad there.
Thanks, Kuldeep. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sir, while in case there's nobody else, or if anybody else wants to add something a little later, they can do so. In the meanwhile, there were a couple of points which I thought I would just, or thoughts rather, that I would share with you. It was such an interesting career spanning a very important period in the history of the Indian Army. In the sense, when we're now talking about an officer he's a wartime commissioned officer, he gets commissioned 43, is it? 43?
44. January 44.
44.
January, yeah.
Okay.
January 44.
So, he saw action in Burma, and then he sees the partition and the transition into independence, and is, of course, a part of the two major conflicts that we have with our neighbor, both in 65 and, of course, in 1971. My suggestion is, sir, that some of these aspects, if you could provide, and you may already have, so this is just I'm just sharing a thought, is that it would be really interesting to see his progress as an individual framed in the larger context of the evolution of the Indian Army through this period as well. And I'll elaborate what I mean by that. For instance, you talk about his early education, and he starts off with the King George's Royal Military Schools, then he goes on to Kitchener College, and then from there on to the IMA. Now, that, to be quite, I remember vaguely reading about it, but to be very honest, this is an aspect which definitely wasn't on the front of my mind, and it may have been covered elsewhere, but I think it might be very useful if, for instance, when you're talking about this period or this aspect of his life, if you could provide this other context, what were the various modes of, let's say, education which a young boy had in those days, whether it was through the Royal Indian Military College at Dehradun, or whether it was through the King George's colleges, the Kitchener College, and so on and so forth, before they, where they were essentially groomed for commissioning. Now, a lot of these institutions catered specifically, including Sonar, where you went to, initially for, their intent was to look after the wards of soldiers. So, and provide them with a kind of avenue by which they could, be groomed for a career in the armed forces. Now, so that was one thought. The other thing is, while during 47, 48, that fascinating account you give us of how he organizes these the evacuation of refugees as an individual initiative. But there was, of course, the Indian Army was very actively involved in this whole process. There was what they had set up, what was then known as the Punjab Boundary Force. And there were also units that were called border guards. Now, while this may not strictly speaking be part of your his biographical narrative, but if you could provide that as a context, that would be really, really both interesting, and I think it would add immensely to the value of the work. The other point I mean, in past you mentioned the use of the Air Force in '67, in Mizoram, and you're right. That is normally held to be the first time that we actually use the Air Force or air power in an offensive role in counterinsurgency operations, and that was a bit of a well, let's say we won't ever do that now. But however, that that wasn't the first. Actually, the first time that this was done was in '51, and that's the last time that Spitfires are used in an operational role anywhere in the world. So the last operational sorties flown by Spitfires were in NIFA, and it was during a thing called Operation MOP that was carried out in 1951, shortly after NIFA was integrated into was formally we were moving up, let's say, to the border, and this was a small operation that was carried out, but Spitfires were used. So please do have a look at it. The center had done a project which was on the history of the Spitfire by Marshal Vikram Singh. So that book is available at the USI library. If you wish to, if you wish, you could have a look at that, and maybe footnote that if you wish. So otherwise, it was fascinating to to hear this very varied and interesting career profile of General Jaswant Singh. Is there anybody else who would wish to add anything or any other comments or questions? As General Sandhu mentioned, this is a work in progress. So, and the intent behind this is, of course, is that if anybody has any thoughts or ideas or suggestions or comments, then he can weigh them and incorporate them as appropriate in his work as well.
Rana, while somebody is while anybody is waiting to come in, I'll just say one or two things. Firstly, thanks a lot. I didn't know about the 1951 incident, frankly. Everywhere they say this was the first, but nonetheless, I'll bring that as a footnote. But Air Force was used to break the siege here. That part because I have not gone into details of the Mizo chapter. Otherwise, in the chapter, the genesis of the insurgency itself. Why did the insurgency take place? And could it have been avoided? All that is there. And what I didn't mention is even artillery was used. And now that I see one face of Major General Alotra, my friend here, he has been very kind enough to give me the war diary of 211 GR. It was one of the first units to move in. And it's an excellent diary. I mean, it's a model war diary, if you ask me. Of course, it covers things that stay in their sector only. And it covers things at the lower level as a battalion. I mean, after all, they fought, the actions were there, all were at company and platoon level. That's an excellent diary, and you get an idea of how they moved in. It was a fighting break-in. Everybody takes it. It's not that troops were there. Nobody even knows that when the insurgency started, there was one Assam rifle battalion, one battalion for the whole area, which you saw that map. And not only, and there were 11 posts, small posts of BSF, etc., that lot. And these guys struck everywhere. And they neutralized the whole lot except one. That was the headquarters of one Assam Rifles and others who were holed up in Aijal. So they defended themselves very well. And it was then that the airstrikes were called and, the rest of it happened. But in the chapters, I'm glad you told me though, because in the chapters, I've tried to bring a lot of context. For example, in partition itself, there were so many things, when you read General Sinha's book, he says how they organized how the army headquarters organized special trains from this side. It was not called Western Army Commander. I'm forgetting exactly because I've written that chap's name, the British chap. He had made a train of his own also, because he would go following these trains where he had his own office and machine guns and all that. And how the special trains, they had barricaded the windows so that no stones could come in, etc. And at what distances we had got, armed guards, dispersed through that. All that is in my book. That part I've already covered. and what was happening the other side, for example. So, but unfortunately, what I saw also after all my reading is that the Indian side was better prepared. Not that there was no mayhem. Slaughters were taking place both sides. But this side, after reading General Sinha's book, we realized, but Pakistan was a nation state. They didn't have any government only, actually. Suddenly there was okay, you are a government of this thing. So there was no, Rawalpindi became there was one command headquarters, and suddenly there were the army headquarters. So they were unable to provide protection. You will be surprised at what all happened. There are photographs of the Kamuki, the Kamuki massacre. So some of those things are in the book to provide. What I've tried to do also is that while each chapter, I've tried to bring in what was otherwise happening around. He's one individual, but what was otherwise happening around, along with some military policies, but also at the national level. For example, when he was Deputy Chief, that's the time the emergency took place. What was General Rainer's reaction, for example, when he refused to have the army? The army did nothing about it. I mean, he stayed out. There are so many other things which were happening nationally, which I tried to bring in bits and pieces just to fix him in a point. But no, this Kitchener College, I read how Tikka Khan got selected. Tikka Khan, the famous General Tikka Khan, went through. He was in a boxing bout. By the way, when the selection chaps came, he and one more person, they had to box each other. They had a boxing bout in front of the selection board. And Tikka Khan, anyway, he made it, and you know where he reached. And the best part is he joined my unit, the one I commanded later. And he and Kumaramangalam nothing, not part of my discussion today, but he and Kumaramangalam both got prisoners of war in Second World War, same unit. So thanks a lot. I mean, I will do all this. Okay, I think somebody else, Kuldeep, wants to say something. Yeah, Kuldeep, you want to say something?
I just think I had one comment on the word which is being used very often. Rana also used it. Indian Armed Forces. Actually, it's a wrong usage of the word. It says very clearly in the Constitution that there are the Defence Forces of India, Defence Services, that are the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. They three constitute the Defence Forces. Armed Forces actually is a loose term which means any body of troops which bears arms. For example, Punjab Home Guards, Haryana Home Guards, the paramilitary forces. So it has been actually loosely used, the word armed forces. We are not really the armed forces, we are the Defence Services of India. That's what I just mentioned. The other interesting part is Abdo. My father's 2 battalions were involved with your dad's battalions in the 65
Really?
war. First Jat, he was commissioned into that. And third Jat was the battalion where he was the 2IC. He trained that battalion when Desmond Hayde took over. Desmond Hayde was the adjutant when we were there in Palampur. And my father went off to command 5 Jat in Daulat Beg Oldie just before the Chinese incident in Galwan Valley during those periods. So I thought I'd just mention this to you, that we've been following parallel paths in some form or the other. So about the Indian Defence Forces, Rana, you may like to have a look actually, because earlier also I pointed it out in our own military groups that we are using this term incorrectly. The other word which is crept into our lexicon, is for example, martyrs. We don't, the military doesn't have martyrs. Martyrs is for a religious cause. We have killed in action, missing in action, or whatever it is. But somehow these new terms which are coming in are not being explained or challenged by people. So I thought I'd just mention this. I may be wrong, but you could have a better look at that.
Thank you very much, sir. I agree with you totally on the martyrs thing, and thank you for pointing out this other aspect. I will definitely have a look at it. You mentioned and you basing this on what, sir? What is you said it's in the
Actually, I think in the Constitution of India, under Article 355 or somewhere near there, it mentions the Defence Services of India are the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. It doesn't say armed forces. So there's a distinction between the defense forces and the armed forces.
I'll have a
we
look
could
at
be we could be part of a we may be part of the larger group called the armed forces, because After all, we are there for the protection, defense of the country. But the defense services are categorized separately. And they're only the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. And I think it is mentioned so in the one of the footnotes or somewhere in the Constitution itself.
Thank you, sir. I'll definitely have a look at it because, as you rightly point out, we must be very precise in the terminology that we use, and I am absolutely in agreement with you about the incorrect continued usage of the word martyrs. That has been pointed out by a few officers recently, but one of the aspects or one of the problem areas is that we do not have a prescribed vocabulary for remembrance and commemoration so far, and we tend to go with these rather populist measures, and then they through popular usage they become de facto terms that are employed. But I will definitely have a look at this, and I'll get back to you in due course with whatever we find. Thank you so much for bringing this.
Because one of the things which are a little disconcerting, the way the military, which is supposed to be an extremely and highly professional force, meant only for external defense, not so much for internal, except on the certain service, is clubbed. Anytime you find some flag march going on, some police guys are also got some army chest marching behind them. I mean, one feels offended to see a thing like that. So these are the things I'm saying. That unless and until we push back to the environment and say, this is a force which is meant for something else. Don't confuse it with the average man roaming around with the khakis and others. And which is what has happened, the whole thing has got muddled. And the lines seem to get blurred. And everybody thinks, okay, Fauji is as good as a policeman, for example. After some time, we may just have that. So as professionals, I think it's our job to put people on the right line. And this is where we could do some homework and push it out also.
Thank you, sir. I agree with you entirely, and I think this is a topic for an entire discussion on its own merits, because there are so many aspects of this that do need to be underlined, and I am in total agreement with you. So we'll follow up. I'll get back to you on this, and thank you so much for bringing it to my attention. Is there any other point or any other question? Shefali, has anybody?
No, so there's just a comment by, I think, General HK Singh saying a very enlightening talk.
Okay, all right. So, sir, in which case, I think we've now come to the end of our prescribed time, and it just remains for me to thank you for having spared the time and for all your meticulous research. And we look forward to, to the manuscript, and when it's completed, I'm sure it will be a very illuminating and educative study. And I'd also like to thank all of you in the audience who have taken the time today to be a part of this session. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Rana. Sorry, something happened again. Thanks a lot.
Okay, no problems. Okay, sir. Bye, sir.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shefali.
Bye, Ajay. Thank you. AV, good to see you there. Vijay, how are you? I think you're on mute. No voice.